Ready? Okay. Welcome. This is the Sphinx interim presentation. We are Team Venture. I'm Samantha Fanzer.
Stephen Ewing. Okay, so first we want to get you guys familiar with the context of our project. Our sponsor is 2 Sigma Investments out of New York City, and what they were looking for, they're a medium-sized company, and what they were looking for is a way for their employees to have a better visibility of projects going on across their firm. So, so what they presented to us is a web-based project management catalog and event subscription system, which kind of sounds a bit like gibberish right now, and that's why we have our keywords. So our keywords through this presentation and within our project that we took some time to define ourselves, because we ourselves were getting confused with our terminology when talking with ourselves and our sponsor, are entities. So an entity is an initiative, milestone, or risk, which saying what's an initiative, that's just a project. Apparently in their JIRA setup, that's what they call the projects. And then a saved query within our project is a whole bunch of search criteria that is saved somewhere, so you can pull it back up and use it to find all the projects that match that criteria, so you can display all those projects through the user. And a subscription within our system is basically continuous updates on certain events. So we have 3 or 4 event types. So you subscribe saying, I want to see these events from these entities with things that match these search criteria, and that's a subscription.
Okay, so talking about scope, when we first started, we were trying to understand. We had a brief description of what they wanted and some idea after talking with them. So we decided the main things that we had that were in scope were a web user interface that the customers and everyone there would be interfacing with, and that's how they'd be getting their information. It would be getting project updates. It'd be going from JIRA through a web API, REST API, excuse me, and into our system, and from there, people would be receiving updates. The other big things that our sponsors wanted were to be able to comment on initiatives, whether in progress or proposed ones, as well as vote, so that they could get feedback from their client or from their employees on the projects that were going on around the firm. And subscriptions, which Yingling talked about briefly, which is being able to subscribe to something, whether it be a specific team's projects or a specific initiative and things that change there. Some of the things that we decided fairly early on that were out of scope was the REST API that would be taking information from JIRA itself. That part was going to be created by our sponsor. We talked with them about that. They created something that we're now interfacing with and pulling information from. Single sign-on is also something they'd like to see down the road, but for this particular project, in order to get everything else done that they'd like, that's currently out of scope, as well as email notifications, which we briefly talked about and decided that that was out of scope as well. One of the things we had that we weren't quite sure whether it was in scope or out of scope was admin tools. So we discussed this and we called these our wish list items that we'd really like to get to, but realize that we may not have the time.
All right, so now I'm going to talk about the process methodology that we use for this project. We decided to go with what we termed a Scrum iterative hybrid. So it's basically, we're doing Scrum, we're doing 3-week sprints, but we also have overhead in terms of the artifacts that are required by the sponsor and the faculty coach. So we're combining this into something that we call Scrum iterative hybrid. So, like I said, we're doing 3-week sprints where we hold a sprint planning meeting at the beginning of one of these sprints. We estimate the tasks that we're going to put in the sprint. We're not using story points, we're actually using hours for our estimation because it just makes it easier for us to keep track of things. And then at the end of these sprints, we hold a demo with the sponsor. And every Tuesday, so the sprints consist of the 3 weeks, and every week we meet with the sponsor on Tuesday to talk with them and bounce ideas and information off of them. And we have the 3 documents, the project plan, the requirements document, and the design document, and these are always evolving during these sprints. So every time we meet with the sponsor, we show them these documents, we talk to them about the changes, we talk to them about things that we have done that week for those documents. And these sprints are managed and documented in Jira, because Jira has a nice agile module that does a lot of the metrics calculation, keeps track of the tasks nicely, and creates the burn down charts for us. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our risk management. Initially, the risks were, or the risks are captured in the project plan initially, and some of the things that we looked at first were scope or feature creep, because I remember we initially were told that like we would have to be dealing with entities in terms of initiatives and milestones, but I think like after the sprint 0 and then into the first sprint, we were told that there was a new entity that we were going to need to be talking about, which were risks. So that was something that we weren't aware of and we need to mitigate. We wanted to keep track of risks and member absences, so we have we know to assign their tasks to them when they were out, and timing constraints if something was supposed to be due at a certain time. And we had first indicators, and we also had mitigations for those risks. And then throughout these sprints, the risks were continuously evaluated and updated to match the current pace of the project. And the metrics that we were keeping track of, like I said, in Jira, the tasks, we are not using story points, we're using hours for the estimation. So velocity is kept track of in Jira, and that's hours per sprint. We're talking about the estimated time versus the actual time for the tasks, and the time for the weekly team hours, and that's the meeting time plus the task time, and that's updated on our website.
This is the burn down chart for our first sprint. Yes, it looks wonky. There's a reason for that. Initially, we were going to be using Trello to keep track of all of our tasks, but then we realized that it's probably a good idea to use Jira, since we're going to try to integrate with Jira. It's good thing to know how Jira works, what our sponsor was talking about, we're going to reference some things in Jira. So we switched over that and we spread. That's you see us creating tasks immediately for you now, so that we can keep track of everything we were doing. Our sprint 1 was actually a lot better, except for the fact that this was a sprint that we decided to start setting things up, so we only had half the sprint. The red line you see is our actual velocity. Blue is the estimated. The jump there is after we finished what we planned. We ended up planning the rest of the sprint. We ended up finishing that off. This sprint is much better. That drop off that you see is when we discovered what epics were within Jira, and epics are considered completed unless you finish every single task within the epic. So while we were still continuing to do tasks, it wasn't considered finished until we finished that last one. This is our current sprint. Obviously, much better than the one before. You can see it. You can't see it. At the very end, our actual isn't quite finished. That's because we have one more task, and that is the question that we have to do to finish up this semester for our end of semester.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about our requirements strategy for elicitation and our continuing evolution of the requirements. So initially, we sat down with our sponsor. It was either our first or second meeting with him. I think it was actually our second, and we read through his project proposal to us, and we went through it and we said, okay, so what do you mean by this? How do you expect this portion of the system to work? And we took probably about 50 minutes with him that day to just read through this, take notes on it, and then afterwards we took those notes and we started forming those into more functional requirements and tried to like eliminate duplicates and functionality and come up with other questions to ask them next week, where we once again sat down in the elicitation session, spent for about 30 minutes, and we went through our large list of questions we had for him based off the previous week and answered those. And so through that time, we used this time to define project-specific terms, such as we had about 4 different terminologies floating around for the same thing at one point. So we were calling things saved filters, saved queries, saved subscriptions, and these were appearing different requirements. They all meant the same thing, but they were all using different words. So we spent that time to hammer it out between our sponsor and ourselves what's the terminology for this, and do all these things actually mean the same thing, or are we talking about different requirements? So from here, we came up with a requirement document. This first draft was just mostly put together from notes from our first solicitation process and from some answers to questions we got from him. We then sent our draft off to the sponsor, and we said, this is what we've been getting from what you've told us the system's going to be like. Are we missing any? Are there any major sections that are missing that we need to fill in? Are all these requirements right? Are there some things that need to be changed? He took time out of his day to go through and mark up our requirements document all over the place, saying, I think this needs to be changed in this way. This needs a little tweak here, and he's passed it back to us, and we looked over that document, and from that document, we had a couple more questions on things he changed, and we said, when did this come into play? When did you add this? Was this always supposed to be here? And then finally we got to what we call version 3.0, which is our current version. And we're not going to our final version because we still feel that requirements could be added or changed depending on what our sponsor sees from our demos. So our user stories, which are kept track of mostly within this requirements document, and the ones that we are currently planning on working on to keep track of in Jira itself. We have the feed on the homepage, which we currently have completed, will show all of your own projects that you're working on or you're on the team that works on them. We have a user story to be able to subscribe to specific entities within the system to receive events. So that's basically almost saying so you're subscribing directly to a singular entity in that case. Another user story is you should be able to perform what we've been calling a faceted search on entities, which just says there's a whole bunch of different search criteria, and you should be able to search through the entire database of entities to find ones that match that criteria. And we also need integration with our sponsors REST API, which so basically they broadcast all of their data up to that, and then we need to pull that down and store it in our own database in our own way to sort through it.
All right. So for our design strategy, we focused on what we're going to call for understanding, say, wireframe-driven development. What we mean by this is the fact that when we first started eliciting requirements and we were talking all these things over, our sponsor really wanted to see wireframes early up front. And after a while, we understood this was because by walking through the wireframes and being like, you click here, this navigates to there, there's multiple paths from here to there, things like that, we're able to better elicit the requirements and write them down. So we did wireframes very early on, and that has helped us both with our requirements and communicating with our sponsor. We also had framework influences. We'll talk about some of our technologies a little bit later, but we're using Java Play and things like that, and Mongo, and so those technologies kind of played into how our architecture was set up. And our sponsor also had some suggestions up front when we asked him, do you already have some idea of what you would like this to look like? And he gave that to us. So we worked with that, and currently what you see is this. Don't get frightened. This is Jira, this little box. This here is the REST API that our sponsor is giving to us. This here is our web, front-end UI that you see. Over here is our database. This is currently Mongo. We'll get into that more in a minute. This whole thing doesn't really exist at the moment. The reason for that is because since we're doing the iterative development, we're only creating what we need at the moment. So you kind of mostly have this processor and ingester at the moment. The ingester's in process. So that's where we're currently at, and that's where we're heading.
All right, now I'm just going to briefly talk about sequence diagrams. This is just getting, we haven't really done a lot of the work or a lot of the features that we did sequence diagrams for, but our sponsor wanted to be on the same page as us in terms of how data is going to flow through the system, and he wanted us to be able to take the requirements document, map the requirements document to the use cases, and map the use cases to the sequence diagrams, and then map the sequence diagrams to information stored throughout the system. So here you have searching for an entity. I'm not going to go into it, but he just wanted us to be on the same page with him in terms of data flow to the system.
Alright, here are a few wireframes that we came up with. Right now, dashboard is the only thing that we can actually show you guys. You can see dashboard is basically the home page that will show up once you log into our system. Also, saving a new query, this is what you'll see. You'll go ahead, search for something. This is something that these are things that you're interested in. You can save it, and this will show up on your home page. And once the query is saved, you'll be able to go back and edit it, check to see what you have saved, change the name of it, change the search criteria that you have. Here you can actually change the settings for an individual subscription to an entity. You'll be able to decide whether or not you want to see events that are maybe created for this entity, or whether or not even is actually changed for this particular entity.
Okay, so covering our technology stack and our implementation. So our sponsor initially handed us a list of technologies they were sort of interested in, and in part this project is to help them gather information on these technologies. So one of our hard requirements was our products had to run the JVM. So this kind of limited us to pretty much Java or Scala. And so from there, he mentioned this play framework that he was looking into and thought it was really interesting. So we then looked at the play framework, and it operates a lot like Ruby on Rails, Django, or MVC in the way that it sort of does web routing for you with then templates that you make for the views that dynamically populates. MongoDB is a NoSQL database that we have on our backend. One of our decisions there was that since we were going to probably be pulling JSON from this API, and now we know we're pulling JSON from this API, that it would be easier to dump that JSON into Mongo, which stores JSON collections instead of parsing it out to seeds. JavaScript, jQuery, and Bootstrap so Bootstrap is currently what's making our front-end UI look ready. And in the future, we plan to do some loading of information with JavaScript so we don't have to keep doing page refreshes every time that something updates. We're using Jenkins CI server to run our continuous integration with our tests on both our dev and master branch from GitHub, which is where we're hosting our code. And so our current status of our implementation, we have our front end with its master pages and one of the sub pages laid out along with the web routing for a couple of the remaining pages. We have our database set up in a way that we believe should be good for the future of our development. And right now we're able to pull data from their REST API and hold on to it, but our JSON parser is a bit overzealous in parsing JSON and isn't exactly helping us in parsing the data we pull.
All right, now we're going to talk about the things that went good, the things that went bad, and the things that we're liking about this project so far. One of the things that we all agree on is that it's awesome to have a sponsor as involved as the one we have, not only in terms of just being there every Tuesday to talk with us, but being so involved with the documentation, being so involved with the REST API, the wireframes, just talking with us, answering all of our questions whenever we need it, being there. It's been a great experience.
So another good choice for us was that using Jira ourselves, it's not only a fairly good project management tool for tracking all of our hours worked and also tracking all of our sprints and how well they're doing, but also since we're using Jira, we understand the terminology and the layout of the system, and this is a system that our system is designed to be pulling information from. So in the end, it was a good idea to use what you're designing.
Yeah, we're also really excited. We feel like we're at a good place right now. We've finished eliciting requirements, at least as far as the beginning goes. We have our documents as completed as they can be for the moment, and we've completed 2 sprints of development so far. As you'll see in a moment with our demo, we're pretty happy with that. Some of the things we've learned, that it's good to solidify terms early. As you've heard already, we had some problems early on. And being able to make sure everyone's on the same page and talking about the same things and understands everything the same way really helps.
I also learned that communicating with our sponsor is actually very useful whenever we had questions. We can email them and we can really get back to us as opposed to waiting until the next Tuesday meeting whenever we talk to them. And plus, all of these technologies are more or less new to us, besides Java. So we're all actually learning something within this project.
Yep. All right, so now I'm going to talk about our plan for the next semester. So like we said, we have basically the structure of the UI complete. We have the couple feeds that we've done so far. But we don't really have a lot of the meat of the system, the subscriptions, the entities, the updates, and stuff like that. So next semester, we're obviously going to focus on the subscriptions to entities and to save queries and faceted search. We're going to focus on commenting and voting on initiatives, milestones, and risks. We're going to further integrate with the REST API and make sure that's all working. And if time permits, we're going to be looking into the admin tools. And for non-functional things, so far we've only really done ad hoc testing on what we've been completed, but that's in part because our Mongo database right now has very limited data. We haven't been able to get a ton of stuff into there, but now with the REST API actually being able to pull information from their Jira, we'll be able to populate our MongoDB and test more thoroughly. As always, we'll continue to talk with the customer and evaluate the project, evaluate the documents, and keep those integrated, and of course the poster for the final presentation.
So I think to get to some questions, we'll have to skip
You can
this.
skip it down.
You can just show it. Just show the website.
It's not a special.
It's like this.
This is all you need to see. It's going to be 30
it's
seconds.
not
It's
on
on the wrong one.
Beautiful.
There's a
Here it is.
website.
Bootstrap. That's pretty bootstrap.
But pretty much most of what you're seeing here is just that we're pulling information from our database and are able to project that. So, questions?
Yes, questions.
Where does team venture come from? So we all felt that we were being venture capitalists, and that is where we got it from.
Any other questions?
Dr. Huck.
We work together to kind of surprise and REST. Broadcasting events. REST is not a broadcast protocol, so we consider other things besides REST as a way to broadcast events.
So it wasn't. So originally that was one of our misunderstandings, and then we mentioned that it was our sponsor who was using REST on their side, and we are pulling events from it.
So you're polling to get events?
Yeah, they're like
listening for events?
they're like endpoints that we have to query for the events. We're not listening.
Right.
We're making GET requests to get the information in
They're
JSON.
doing up events on their end.
Yes. So their end has their end has a whole bunch of REST endpoints, including one that says get all events or entities created since a certain time and date, and then our end, we're going to be responsible for having something that pulls that every so often to say, give me all the new entities or events that have been created.
You mentioned some process along the way, but I was kind of wondering how you guys are monitoring or measuring quality along the process.
Could you be more specific?
So quality can obviously mean a lot of things, but in this case I'm talking more about the quality of the product you're creating.
Okay, well,
It's very complex.
right. Well, as we're developing this, I mean, we have it running on the server, so we've been continuously talking with the sponsor, and the sponsor has seen this, and the sponsor has been able to play around with it, and so far they have been very happy with what we've shown them. So,
Are you keeping any metrics?
metrics in terms of quality?
Yeah.
Not explicitly.
Yeah, so we're not keeping any sort of like defects or any real hard things of time sense like last failed build or anything. Jenkins does keep track of that for us, but it's not explicitly expressed as one of our metrics.
Yeah, so far we really haven't really developed the meat of the system yet. We really just done the UI stuff. A lot of the framework has generated code for us. We've written some Mongo queries through Java, but we haven't really written anything that we can do crazy metrics on just yet.
Yeah,
But
and
we
once
will.
we're able to test, which should be easier once we start populating our Mongo database, which we are very close to, we're going to be able to write a lot more solid tests that should be able to give us a little more indication of that as well.
Okay, let's thank the team.